So there's a video I wanted to make on Monday, but I couldn't because TikTok decided to ban me for a week. The community guidelines clearly spell out that it's a violation to be as handsome and funny and smart as I am. But this past Monday was a very important day, because it was the 20th anniversary of when America invaded Iraq. The Iraq War is one of the biggest crimes in world history. It killed millions of people, displaced many more, and permanently destabilized large portions of the Middle East. And nobody responsible for it has ever been held accountable. In the wake of 9/11, President George W. Bush had as high as a 90% approval rating. The American people were terrified, they trusted him, and he could do pretty much anything he wanted. And what he did was completely lie to them. The rationale for going to war in Iraq rested on two legs. And that was the idea that Iraq's president, Saddam Hussein, had weapons of mass destruction that he intended to use against America and her allies. And that he was harboring and supporting Al-Qaeda, the people responsible for 9/11. But both of those things were lies. Saddam was a brutal dictator, no doubt, but he was in no way a threat to America. No stockpiles of WMDs, or even a hint of a WMD program, were ever found in Iraq. In addition, the 9/11 Commission found that there was absolutely no ties between Al-Qaeda and Saddam's regime. The administration of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney lied. And they knew they were lying. But invade Iraq, America did anyway, on March 20th, 2003. 8 months later, Saddam was captured, and George W. Bush declared victory. But the mission was far from accomplished, as American soldiers would spend over a decade occupying Iraq. Removing Saddam from power led to a massive power vacuum that resulted in sectarian violence between Sunnis and Shias, and a lengthy insurgency against American soldiers. It led to nearly 5,000 American soldiers losing their lives, and nearly 1 million Iraqis, all based on a lie. Now, Bush and Cheney obviously rightly get all of the blame for America's failures in Iraq, but the vote in Congress to go to war was bipartisan. People who voted in favor of it included Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein. It also included Hillary Clinton. It also included President Joe Biden, who repeated the lie of WMDs on the floor of the Senate in 2003, and then said during the 2020 election that he never believed Saddam had WMDs. One of the very few Republicans that voted against it was a legend you may have heard of named Ron Paul. Selling the lies of the Iraq War to the public also would never have been possible without full compliance from the corporate media. The same news outlets like the New York Times and Washington Post that constantly complain about disinformation today were the biggest promoters of the disinformation that led to America invading Iraq. Take, for example, this article that was written by a man named Jeffrey Goldberg in 2002. It promoted the idea that Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda were in an alliance, which was later determined to be a lie. His reporting was used by the Bush-Cheney administration to sell the war to the public, and he even won a Pulitzer Prize for it. Today, Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. You could also look at people like Bill Kristol, who was the media's biggest cheerleader for the Iraq War when it was happening. Today, he's now a liberal icon and a frequent guest on MSNBC. And then there was also the way people who didn't support the war were treated. They were called unpatriotic, such as this article that was written by George Bush's former speechwriter, David Frum, in 2003. He's also now a liberal icon and frequent guest on MSNBC. The Dixie Chicks, who recently renamed themselves to the Chicks because Dixie is racist, were also canceled by the country music industry for speaking out against the war. In the Senate cafeteria, they changed the name of French fries to Freedom Fries because France refused to support America's invasion. That's actually a thing that happened. But it was all based on lies. Now, has George W. Bush been ostracized from society for the worst foreign policy decision in American history? No, he hangs out with Ellen DeGeneres. Nancy Pelosi commonly talks about how much respect they have for each other. Because, Donald Trump may not have sent an entire generation of Americans to war based on a lie, but he tweets mean things about people. Dick Cheney gets welcomed back to the Capitol with open arms when he criticizes Republicans. But they are, and will always be, two of the most evil men in American history. They knowingly and willingly lied the American public into a devastating war. A war that America never should have been in. And the biggest victims of it are the ones who never came home.